Carthage must be destroyed. We are going to continue on with the life of a miniature here today. And as you can see here, I don't know if my close-up's going to work, so I think that's okay. Kind of hard to focus with this camera here, but maybe going in this so close isn't so good. But you can see my green stuff is stuck there in the model that I put together, and he's basically ready to prime. I've mounted him on this Citadel, I'm not even actually sure what it's called. It's meant to hold models, and Games Workshop sells them. I'm not sure if other companies do them, but it's good for holding models and painting them so you can stabilize them when you're just painting. I think it holds square and circles. I've only ever done it with circle bases. Of course, you don't have to use this kind of painting handle. It's called a painting handle. I don't remember the real name. Maybe I'll put in the description after. But the painting handle itself holds the model, keeps it stable, and it's better than holding on to the miniature's base. You can also, of course, get the other options out there. I sometimes use medicine containers and sticky tack and just stick guys to the bottom and hold them up that way, just so I don't have to touch any base or have to touch the model. Anyways, we're going to talk about priming today. And priming a miniature is very important because it will allow the paint to stick on much, I guess, better. And it also gives you a better surface just to work with and paint on. There are three main ways to prime, and I usually employ two of them. The three main ways that I know of priming are going to be in the form of paint-on primer, which is like this. I don't know if Citadel still sells this, but this is Imperial primer, and you just use a brush to paint it on. I think it only comes in black. Maybe other companies do other colors. I'm not sure, but I've only ever used black for paint on. So we'll look at how I paint stuff on here quick. I mean, I'm not going to do anything too fancy with painting. I'm just going to prime them up and go. But yeah, you just get a brush and you apply the primer. The instructions usually are on a primer container and tell you how much or how thin you should prime on the model. The other option, and I think a lot of people do this, is that they use the aerosol cans, right? If you're going to spray paint or prime anything, you can use the aerosol cans. Now, I've got 3 different brands here. There's obviously tons of different primer out there, but these are the 3 I've used recently. Citadel Games Workshop also has some. Army Painter has some. There's a lot of brands out there, so, you know, there's way more than just this. I like using Duplicolor for metals if I need a black primer. It's an automotive primer series. It goes on really thin. It's even sandable if you put it on too thick. I've never had to sand it. But I use that for my metals, some plastics, but usually metals. And I find that it holds really well. Of course, you want to spray outside or at least in some well-ventilated area with a mask on, because it is poisonous and all that stuff. Rust-Oleum painters, I'm not a big fan of on plastics and metals personally. I use this for some scenery and only scenery, stuff that's not models, but that's just me. I've heard some people use Rust-Oleum painters, different primer, different spray paints on their models. And finally, one of my favorites is Vallejo, or just a colored primer, and this one is Desert Yellow. I use it on, it's almost out, as you can hear, but I use it on my desert guys. You can see here they've even got a tank down there using the Desert Yellow here. But a colored primer is really good if you want to skip a step. I have a lot of yellow, or desert yellow I should say, with my World War II Italians in North Africa. So I spray them, and then I don't have to fill in as much because the primer has already essentially painted in everything for me. Then I just fill in the spots that I'm missing, right? So that's one option. And yeah, I mean, most people I think know this. Anyone who's primed before probably has taken this route and used a spray primer. Just follow the instructions on the. I'm not going to use any of these really, except for the paint on stuff. This is me just explaining through the life of a miniature what they have to face. The final way of priming, and I'm not going to use this because I don't have an airbrush, is airbrush primer. And there's different paints out there, different paints. Sorry if you hear my dog snoring in the background there, but he's quite loud. But there's different primers that you can use with an airbrush. Vallejo does a good one, but I don't use an airbrush. I actually brush this on. So yeah, you can also use an airbrush to prime on your paint. So, and I'm not going to say much on that because I don't have any experience with an airbrush, so you'll have to watch some other videos on that. But that's the three ways people prime stuff, really. Some people say you don't have to prime your miniatures. I disagree for metals. I think metals must have as much protection as possible, because if you're going to wargame with them, then yes, I think you should prime them, seal them, do everything you can to protect the model, make sure it's set properly, add those extra coats on. Plastics, I've painted some without primer and they still are going, so I think plastic holds paint a lot better if you don't want to do the priming step. Beyond that, yeah, I always just suggest priming them. I like to spray my metals, and then if I can use my Vallejo, now I use the Vallejo air spray primer, I paint this on, and for me this is the best result I've ever had. It's even better than whatever Citadel stuff. This is a really old can now, and I don't use that pot, but my favorite has been Vallejo, both for spraying and for just for painting. I don't paint anything on metals. If it's a metal model, I will spray it, because I find all the paint stuff I've tried personally doesn't hold well on metals, whereas the spray just sticks better on metal. And I usually use a Duplicolor for anything I want to do black, and then I'll use alternative colors, white, gray, or yellows, or whatever other color there is out there, if I have a main color I want to cover on another model. My dog is quite loud. Sorry if you can hear him. Sometimes he burps and it's just so loud. So, alright, so I guess if anything you get out of this video is you can see the result of how Vallejo surface primer is going to look. Or rather, you're going to see how Vallejo surface primer will look once it's painted on. I've heard some people don't like to paint on Vallejo. I've heard some people say that Vallejo isn't their favorite primer and they've had some poor results. But in my experience so far, Vallejo has been the best for both aerosol and air spray. And I don't even use the air spray for Vallejo. I mean, I'm painting on the air spray with a brush. So I'm just gonna give this a good shake here. Set down some paper towel, because you should always have some paper towel and some water nearby, even when you're priming and brushing on. And we're just gonna brush this guy right up. All right, so I've given this a good shake. I usually shake it for, I say about a minute. You could do more if you're not certain. And I like to screw the cap right off and just take the primer right out of the lid here. Now I'm gonna prime this in an awkward position here. I don't want this primer to tip. I got a box that my camera's sitting on, and it's got a cell phone camera holder, so it's kind of an awkward position for me to paint here. When I start doing base coats in the future videos for this series, I'm gonna have to sit at a different angle. But for primer, it doesn't really matter. So I've just shaken that. I don't thin it or anything, you know, and I just start generously applying it on here. So I don't know, anybody watching this, what's your favorite way to prime your models? My favorite is brush on, because brush on primer doesn't leave any residue, doesn't leave a smell. It might leave a little smell, but it won't be in the air. You'd have to go up to the model to actually smell it. But yeah, my favorite is brush on primer. I prefer black wherever I can use it. I do everything with black. I do whites, I do yellows, any color like that, really. I should say I'm also using I'm not using an old brush, but I'm not using the best brush, because there's no accuracy involved with this priming. You just want to spread it all over. Make sure you get every area. I should say that sometimes, it's not true, sometimes I do brush on metals. I said earlier that I don't, but sometimes I do, and that's only if like I spray something and then in the underarm I miss something. On my Italians, I'll use the Vallejo desert stuff on the side you see there, and sometimes there's some spots I miss, and I actually use the black primer that I'm using here to get into it, and then I use the Vallejo base coat color Desert Yellow, which is the same color more or less than that. It's the same color. It's slightly different in shade, but once you put a wash over it, it looks the same. And I also layer it after, so you don't even notice that I've patched up a few spots once I've painted it on here. So this guy is fairly simple to do. He didn't have any like complex, he didn't have any complex areas to really get into. And I'm just gonna make sure I brush in there. I'm gonna check him up close here because I can't see that far away. But yeah, he's looking good. He's got some spots down here on his feet and legs that I didn't quite get. And you know, if the primer's not flawless and you miss a tiny, I got a hair on there I'll have to remove. If the primer's not flawless and you don't, if I can get it with my hand, I usually use tweezers when I do this so I don't touch it. Oh yeah, I got it. But yeah, if the primer's not flawless on the Mini and you get some spots that are still open but it's like underneath them, like, you know, maybe he's got something in his gun area here, don't worry about it, because chances are if it's in a recess or some low area where nobody sees, it's not going to flake off, especially if it's plastic. I think it's more of a deal if you do it on metals. All right, so this guy's all dark now, and I'm just going to let him dry. It's got a little bit in there that I'll work on off camera here. But basically, when you are priming a Mini, you want to let the miniature, I think most companies usually say 12 plus hours, maybe 24 even. I wait a minimum of 24 hours before I start painting on them, just to make sure that they've fully dried. Now, even if you wait 24 hours, some primer, some paint may not fully cure. I actually have some friends who wait like a whole week after they prime. I think it's not a bad idea to just let your Mini with any kind of paint on it sit there and just cure, because I think some paints do really take that long to cure. So whatever they're using, I'm not exactly sure. They'll wait for quite a while and work on other things until it's fully cured. So I'm just gonna let this dry to the minimal amount so it looks wet here. I'm just gonna wait until that initial wetness wears off and then show you the result after. Okay, I think this is clear, but his initial wetness has already started to, I don't know how to say it. I monitor these guys in the first little moments that I prime them, and he's still wet. He's gonna be wet for a while, but that watery feel is slowly turning into a sheen, and then that sheen will eventually go a lot, it'll end up being a bit more matte. I find that this brush on airspray stuff does have a bit of a shine to it, but that's not a problem when you start painting on it. And that's some good coverage there. You can see, I'm not sure if you can see, the sheen might be blocking it or getting in the way of it, but you can see I don't have any mold lines there. If I had left the mold lines on, like I talked about before, you'd see these long lines and bumps. But the primer does really good with getting all that detail and all that stuff that would be harder to see if you just straight up did a blank plastic. I think anyway. So yeah, that's it for priming. Really simple if you're doing brush on. You want to be careful for hair and stuff. I have a dog, as I've said, and you know, the dog will shed hair, and sometimes I find a hair on my painted model and it kind of angers me a bit. But what can you do? Just pick it off with some tweezers and go. But yeah, he'll be ready to paint in 24 hours, and that'll be the next video where we start talking about some base coats. And I'm not going to do the whole base coat painting. This isn't like a tutorial thing so much as more as like a talk and show you guys the process I personally do for painting models. But anyway, that is it for the priming now. If you have any questions or want to discuss how you like to prime, just mention it in the comment section below. Next time we'll start putting some color on this lad. And yeah, I just want to thank you all for watching, and if you want to see more content, just like and subscribe. We'll keep making videos, so have a good one, have a good time. Bye bye.